everyone, what's up? In today's video I'm reviewing Season 1 of Andor, a new series that recently aired on Disney+. Now, before continuing, please be aware that this review does contain spoilers. The show follows the story of Andor Cassian, the rebel character in Rogue One who, to remind the viewers, died heroically by the end of the film together with the rest of his group trying to get the Death Star plans to the rebel forces led by Princess Leia. The show is a prequel to that movie, which acts as a prequel to the original Star Wars movie A New Hope. Within the first few minutes, the show establishes itself as a stark departure from the classic Star Wars PG-oriented formula of George Lucas. The first scene takes place in a brothel, but it doesn't really go beyond just a few words and some tough looks from two obnoxious guards. That scene establishes a few important aspects about the main character's motivations and the show's unique presentation of the protagonists. Cassian is looking for his sister, who disappeared after a possible kidnapping. In order to find her, he will go to lengths previous Star Wars heroes never went, like killing a non-involved guard in cold blood. The story started with scenes in a dark Blade Runner-esque setting, including extra rain shots and the appropriate musical score to accompany it. Without spoiling too much, the first two episodes were the worst start and the worst way to endear the show on its viewers. They were slow and hardly anything happened. The pacing was off and they were anticlimactic. It's a series for adults that is very different from the usual Star Wars series. It feels more like a self-contained sci-fi thriller with thematic and visual elements that are very different from the traditional Star Wars format. One of the most noticeable differences is the dialogue, which isn't very Star Wars-like. Instead, there's a lot of dialogue and visual elements that reflect our reality. Things like noodle cups and costume choices or even musical instruments. Also, the Empire officers and the rebels behave differently on screen than they do in the movies and other Star Wars series and properties. The show's pacing gets much better from the third episode, but it's a slow burn show that doesn't fit everyone, especially if you like your classic Star Wars. The first season is well shot, has very believable sets and costumes, and is grounded in reality. It's clearly inspired by other more realistic sci-fi shows and thrillers, both in terms of the visual elements and thematic material. The show reminds me of a lot of the current trends with the dark and gritty television shows, but with a more of a sci-fi twist. The series has some great acting, especially Stellan Skarsgård as Luthen Rael and Genevieve O'Reilly as Mon Mothma. Diego Luna's acting as Cassian Andor is solid, but he is sometimes overshadowed by the other characters in the series. It's also worth noting that Fiona Shaw's portrayal of Cassian's adoptive mother, Marva, as well as the performances by Forrest Whitaker as Saw Gerrera and Andy Serkis as Kino Loy were all fantastic. There were a few other actors who shined in their relatively smaller parts, like Antor Esser as Major Partangas. We remember him from Game of Thrones, and here he plays the classic evil, calculating officer or Major of the Empire in the show, a role we've seen so many times in the franchise played by classically trained and posh British actors. Things take off for the better in the third episode and the quality improves. There's an increase in tension and faster-paced scenes when it comes to anything involving the main protagonists and the main side characters. Episode 3, Episode 6, and Episode 10 were the best episodes of the show. They had tense, action-filled scenes that left me on the edge of my seat. Episode 6 in particular was the best episode of the first half of the season. The dialogue, direction, special effects. The rebels' plan didn't go nearly as well as planned, and there were major losses on both sides of the Empire as well as the rebels' side. Episode 10 was the best directed episode of the show and one of the best you'll see this year. The direction was perfect, the acting was incredible, the stakes were high, and the episode had a really emotional impact when we saw the prisoners come together to fight for freedom knowing they are likely to die in their attempt to break free from that horrific prison. There was a bit of an abrupt change between the first half and the second half of the season, especially when Cassian Andor got imprisoned in such a random manner, almost as if he lost his intelligence. It was then that things started to get back on track, and episode 9 and 10 as one package were both great and can be considered the true pinnacle of the season and the show. The season's finale, episode 12, didn't live up to the expectations set by episode 10, but still delivered a very good finale despite the fact that it seemed too convenient for all of the main characters to appear at the same place at the same time. The recording of Marva's speech and the ensuing chaos marked the culmination of the season-long build-up to the moment when the citizens of Ferrix took up arms against the oppressive Empire regime. The show provides a glimpse into the bureaucracy, corruption and the complexity of the Empire forces, in this case the corporate forces and their superiors on Coruscant, the capital. Some are not 100% evil, some of them are more complicated, some even switch to the other side, some have families with children, even though they are still portrayed negatively. The story isn't always black and white as it's always been portrayed in the Star Wars franchise. Similarly, the show emphasizes the lack of moral purity of the rebels on the other side of the conflict. The rebels are generally more grey than they appeared previously. They are not 100% good or heroic as George Lucas portrayed them in his films. They are flawed, and some of them are willing to kill their allies and friends in cold blood to achieve their personal goals. Among them are opportunists and those willing to sell out their friends for money. In this story, the stakes are high, and the side characters do die violently both for the Empire and for the protagonists. The protagonists are not invincible, and they do suffer significant losses. The show provides an insight into what happened under the harsh rule of the Empire in terms of human suffering. The oppressive rule of the Empire and its consequences will inevitably spark the rebellion, because it illustrates the everyday tribulations of the common folk under the oppression of the Empire and its forces. Overall, I truly liked the complexity the show gave to both the Empire and the rebel forces, and that's probably its strongest aspect. But now for the aspects that didn't work for me or were at least questionable. The Star Wars aesthetics are lacking, and it's more for the mature audiences. It doesn't really feel like the classic Star Wars. Unlike the Star Wars of George Lucas, this series is more connected to our modern world than to a far-off secondary sci-fi world. So in a way, it's not really his Star Wars, but a very good sci-fi show based loosely on his world and characters. That could be both a negative and a positive depending on your personal taste. The show needed a better start to attract the number of viewers that it deserved. Like in episode 7 and the scene depicting Cassian Andor being captured, or in the first 2 episodes involving the Empire's corporate forces, there are a few obvious allegories for modern American social politics. Nevertheless, it doesn't seem too egregious and makes relative sense within the context of the story. Despite being necessary, the flashbacks came too early and brought the pacing down, especially in the first 2 episodes. The show truly takes off in the 3rd episode as the plot moves forward at an accelerated pace, but there's no real excuse for the poor start which turned away many potential viewers. The pacing in the show and the lack of balance between its various components, the character scenes and the action scenes, are the biggest problems with the show. There's not enough action in what should be a Star Wars show. And yes, action scenes and fast-paced scenes are both part of what makes Star Wars what it is. The director wanted to give more depth to the characters, but he ended up sacrificing the natural pacing that the show needed. Rather than 2 slow episodes before 1 great action-oriented episode, it should have been just 1 slow episode before 2 great episodes filled with fast-paced action and/or strong character and plot developments. Hopefully the director will improve inner structure for Season 2, which will allow for better pacing throughout the series. Andor was caught in the most random way possible after vacationing under a false name in episode 7, which was rather slow. It seemed random and forced in an otherwise consistent show for him to be caught for looking weird on the beach by a stormtrooper, and clearly this whole scene was an allegory for how the showrunners view the American police in the US based on what happened in 2020. As a result, I wish they hadn't used this allegory, since it feels not only forced, but also it doesn't really make sense based on the first 6 episodes. Cassian wouldn't have made the mistakes leading to his arrest. He would have tried to escape, and he just lost all of his intelligence and skills for absolutely no real reason. Another storyline thread that didn't really work for me is the Cyril storyline. It has no real point in it. Why should we follow the tribulations of Cyril after the Empire had fired him from the corporate forces? After the failed chase in the 3rd episode, he lost his job. But why should we care about what happens next in his mundane life as a clerk, despite his whole part being well acted? He's done literally nothing for 3 episodes and never even attempted to have any relevance to the main plot with the rebels or Cassian until very late, where his character was clumsily linked with Dedra. Even after he saved her in that finale, I don't really care about this strange, possibly romantic storyline developing between the two characters. As another minor complaint, characters appear on planets while in the storyline they shouldn't be able to escape Imperial forces so easily. Even though Imperial forces were heavily present all around Cassian's home planet, he managed to return to it without any problems several times. The way the rebels get past Empire forces seems a bit too convenient and easy. I can nitpick other things in the show, but overall it's a very good sci-fi show based on the Star Wars universe and based on the events told in Rogue One. However, it's not the classic Star Wars series or movie that we've always known, and that may be a good or a bad thing depending on how you view it. Despite the weak start, the show gets better with each episode culminating with an excellent 10th episode. The series has its flaws, and I mentioned some of them in this video. However, the great acting and character depth of some of the main side characters outweigh the negatives. Especially the great performance by the wonderful actor Stellan Skarsgård as the mysterious and duplicitous rebel leader and smuggler Luthen Rael. This makes this Star Wars-inspired production the best Star Wars show on Disney Plus and perhaps even better than their recent Star Wars movies. The first season is in my opinion a solid 8 or 8.5, but this score refers to the quality of the series as a whole, as a unique sci-fi show, not as a Star Wars show, because it's just too distant from the universe created by George Lucas with its unique inner rules and visuals. Andor really stands out as a very good sci-fi, but also very different in tone, themes, world building, and many other aspects compared to all of the other Disney Plus Star Wars shows like The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, and of course the upcoming Ahsoka series and Season 3 of The Mandalorian. Even though I don't consider it to be a true Star Wars show, in the sense that it's not the Star Wars of George Lucas, and despite the weaker first 2 episodes, I still recommend watching the show, especially the action-oriented episodes that stand out even among other shows this year for their excellent production, direction, and wonderful acting performances. Just before I finish, the official trailer for the 3rd season of The Mandalorian came out. On the basis of the trailer, it seems that this season will be even bigger and better than the previous seasons, but I do have my reservations because of how insignificant they made the events that transpired at the end of Season 2 to be after what happened during the first season of Boba Fett. Despite the inconsistencies, I hope The Mandalorian will continue to deliver based on the fans' expectations. And I also hope that Season 2 of Andor will be even better than its first season. And perhaps we'll eventually get a Luke Skywalker Disney Plus show with a similar style to Andor or The Mandalorian. It's the one Disney Plus show that they should have made years ago and didn't for reasons that in my opinion are unrelated to creative reasons. With that, I would like to thank you for watching and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for my future videos. And if you can, please leave your comments down below and I'll see you next time.